Good afternoon, good morning, good evening from wherever you are, and a very warm welcome to the 2026 Global Days of Action on Tax Justice for Women's Rights. My name is Grace Arina, and I lead the Feminist Tax Initiative, a project being nurtured under the auspices of Tax Justice Network Africa and now we AfriFem Collective, and I will be your moderator for today. Before we begin, please note that simultaneous interpretation is available in English, Spanish, and French. It is now my pleasure to invite Maureen Mburu, the Tax and Gender Lead and Africa Campaigns Coordinator at the Global Alliance for Tax Justice, to the floor to officially launch this year's Global Days of Action. Maureen, over to you.
Thank you so much, Grace. Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us this day. It is wonderful indeed to have you here with us as we launch the 10th Global Days of Action on Tax Justice for Women's Rights. The Global Days of Action on Tax Justice for Women's Rights is an initiative of the Global Alliance for Tax Justice with its regional networks, Tax and Fiscal Justice Asia, Tax Justice Network Africa, Tax Justice Europe, Red de Justicia Fiscal, Fact Coalition, and Canadians for Tax Fairness, as well as the members of GATJ's Tax and Gender Working Group. We gather at a critical moment. Across the world, countries are facing a deepening care crisis. Women and girls continue to shoulder the largest share of unpaid and underpaid care work, sustaining households, communities, and economies, often at significant cost to their income, time, and their well-being. The scale of this contribution is immense. Globally, 16.4 billion hours of unpaid care work are performed every day, with women carrying more than 3/4 of this work. If valued even at minimum wage, unpaid care would amount to approximately 11 trillion US dollars annually. Yet, this essential work remains largely invisible in economic policy and insufficiently supported through public systems. Recognizing care as a human right requires a shift in how we design our economies. It means ensuring universal access to quality, affordable care services, decent working conditions for care workers, and strong public systems that reduce and redistribute the unequal burden of care carried by women. However, achieving this depends fundamentally on one factor: adequate and sustainable public financing. Today, many countries, particularly in the global south, face severe fiscal constraints. At the same time, the global tax system continues to enable large-scale revenue losses. Each year, countries lose an estimated 480 billion US dollars due to corporate tax abuse and offshore wealth. These losses limit the fiscal space for essential public services, increase reliance on austerity and regressive taxation, and ultimately shift the costs of care back onto households and onto women's unpaid labor. The care crisis is therefore not only a social challenge, it reflects deeper structural inequalities in the global economic and tax architecture. Today, this work intersects with a historic opportunity. Governments are currently negotiating a United Nations Framework Convention on International Tax Cooperation. If ambitious and inclusive, this process could address the long-standing imbalances in the allocation of taxing rights, strengthen tax transparency and international cooperation, and expand fiscal space for sustainable development. For feminist movements and care advocates, the stakes are clear. Fair allocation of taxing rights, effective taxation of multinational corporations and high net worth individuals, and stronger tax transparency are essential to enable countries to invest in healthcare, childcare, education, and other crucial gender transformative public services. This year's campaign also marks an important milestone. We are celebrating 10 years of the Global Days of Action on Tax Justice for Women's Rights. Over the past decade, this initiative has brought together feminist movements, trade unions, and civil society across regions to highlight the gender dimensions of tax policy and to advocate for equitable tax systems that support public services and gender equality and equity. Throughout the week of 2nd to the 8th of March, the campaign, under our call, Tax Justice for the Human Right to Care, will mobilize partners worldwide to advance 6 key priorities. 1. Recognize care as a human right and a public good. 2. Fairly allocate taxing rights to advance global and gender justice. 3. Publicly finance care through progressive and redistributive taxation. 4. Tax the rich and the multinational corporations. 5. Deliver a feminist UN tax convention. And 6. End tax secrecy. At its core, our message is simple. There can be no gender equality without strong public care systems, and no public care systems without fair and effective taxation. The UN Tax Convention negotiations are not just about tax rules. They are about whether countries will have the resources to fund care, reduce inequality, and fulfill women's rights. This is a critical moment to ensure that global tax decisions place people, gender equality, and the human right to care at the center. At the end of this event, at the end of the webinar, I will talk a little bit more about the planned actions. For now, it is my absolute pleasure to officially open this 10th edition of the Global Days of Action on Tax Justice for Women's Rights. Thank you so much for joining. Please engage, please participate. Back to you, Grace.
Thank you, Maureen, for those remarks. They were inspiring. I would like to jump right into the first session, which will be the panel session. And we look forward to an engaging conversation. So for the participants, kindly submit all your questions and your comments through the Q&A box. Our first speaker, Veronica Montufar, who is the head of Social, Economic, and Climate Policy at Public Services International. She is a sociologist and political scientist with a master's degree in political sociology and more than 3 decades of experience rooted in the struggles for human rights, equality, and social justice within the social and labor movements. Veronica, my question to you has 2 parts. Firstly, what does it mean to recognize care as a human right? And secondly, what does recognizing care as a human right actually mean for governments in practice?
Thank you very much, Grace, and greetings, everyone. It's a pleasure for me and for Public Services International being here today. I could say that we have to recognize our wins and our joint wins. And I want to start my intervention remembering that in 2021, Public Services International, with a coalition of feminist and human rights organizations, in which the Tax and Gender Working Group of the Global Alliance for Tax Justice is a member, we launched a Rebuilding the Social Organization of Care manifesto. This manifesto put into the debate, into the global debate, 5 R's beyond the 5R framework of the International Labor Organization, that it's this framework meant to be for the world of work. Our Rebuilding the Social Organization of Care manifesto was launched for the society. And we put there a political approach that went beyond the economic and instrumental approach that the care economy at that time had. So what was new in this Rebuilding the Social Organization of Care manifesto was new 4 different approaches and 4 different proposals. The first one, we said, and I want to reaffirm this. In 2021, we put into the world the R of recognition, saying that care needs to be recognized as a human right. Secondly, we put some other approach in the redistribution R, and in this R, we said, we need to redistribute care from families to public services. The third approach was to put the R of reclaim. we were saying that we need to reclaim the public nature of care, to reclaim the fundamental role of the state in financing, controlling, and providing public care systems, public care services. And in our reward R, we put the representation part in which we as trade union workers and trade union movement say that needs to be fulfilled in the arena of collective bargaining and social dialogue. So I am putting framing this intervention because I think that what we are doing is not only changing the rationale, changing the discourse, we are also changing realities. And this reality start to change in a very more concrete way since the historic advisory opinion of the Inter-American Human Rights Court that in 2025 put this framing of care as a standalone human right. So what this means to society? First of all, it means that we are, or this dimension of care as a human right, highlights the political obligation of the states, not only governments, because governments change, regimes changes. The state has the obligation to guarantee care as a human right. What this means? This means that there is a right to be cared, to take care, and to self-care. And for us, for the trade union movement, the dimension to take care needs to be fundamental of our advocacy and our struggle for decent work for paid care workers worldwide. So this ruling of the Inter-American Human Rights Court has shown to the world that care is a right, that care is a standalone human right. It's not dependent of other human rights. It's interrelated to other human rights, but it stands alone, and that the state has the fundamental role to guarantee this right. And I want to end with this, that profit could not be the center of care, and that we need to provide care as a responsibility of society, but the responsibility and fundamental responsibility of the state. Over to you, Grace.
Thank you, Veronica, for that. The social organization of Care Manifesto was indeed groundbreaking in asserting that care needs to be recognized as a human right, and profit shouldn't be central to care. We will move right over to our second speaker, who is Yandura Chipeta, who is the Executive Director of ActionAid Malawi. She is a dedicated advocate for social justice and women's rights, with over 14 years of experience in international development, program management, and fundraising. She has worked extensively on issues such as girls' education, gender equality, economic justice, and child protection. So, Yandura, my question to you is, how do austerity measures, fiscal constraints, or debt undermine government's ability to fulfill their human rights obligation to care?
Thank you so much, Grace. I I think there is a lot, particularly for Global South governments, in relation to how their obligations in relation to meeting care responsibilities, recognizing, reducing, and redistributing care, and particularly also acknowledging that it is the role of the state to provide care services is largely constrained as a result of the push by the international financial institutions for governments to reduce the wage bill, but also to consolidate the economy in terms of fiscal consolidation and restructure the debt that they have. So a lot of countries in Africa, and I'll give a lot of examples from Malawi, which is where I am based and the country I am working in. A lot of countries in Africa are constrained by debt. They're actually facing a debt crisis. And Malawi in particular, right now, the debt to GDP ratio is at 90%. So already it is quite clear that the fiscal space is quite limited for government to prioritize and finance the provision of care services, including other gender-responsive public services. And this is because the IMF-backed policies have affected government's ability to realize the human rights obligations in relation to care, pushing for cuts to public sector spending. And the most affected public sectors have been the health sector and the education sector in most countries in Africa, including Malawi. An analysis that we have done through the research as ActionAid, and this is a study that we conducted in 6 countries, Ethiopia, Ghana, Kenya, Liberia, Malawi, and Nigeria, with different frontline workers in the health sector and the education sector, but also with community members to highlight their experiences in relation to the 2 public services, which are health and education. Highlights the fact that enrollment, for example, in schools continues to increase by about 30% in the last 3 to 5 years. However, the numbers of teachers have stagnated because governments are constrained from recruiting teachers as a result of the IMF-backed austerity measures. So about 70% of the surveyed teachers reported heavier workloads and significant increases in class sizes. And the significant increase in terms of the numbers of learners has also affected the student-to-teacher ratio, which affects also the quality of the teaching and learning process. And particularly for Malawi, about 80% noticing an increase, an 80% increase in the student-to-teacher ratio. And there are different variations in terms of urban and local geographical location. And beyond that, there's minimal attention that teachers are able to give to children because the class sizes are large. I remember in one community, they highlighted that there was a class size of about 200 learners and one teacher. How can one teacher pay attention to a class size that big? So already that gives us a picture in terms of the quality of the education service that is delivered. And it also makes us question whether learning is indeed taking place. We have expanded access to education by saying primary education is free. And from January 2026, the Malawi government has said secondary education is also free. But we have not provided the relevant supportive mechanisms to ensure that learning is indeed taking place. And the most recent report from the ministry, it has just been issued a month ago, actually highlights the fact that learning is not taking place. because learners, an assessment of learners indicated that they are failing to meet the learning objectives, the proficiency levels in mathematics, in English, and also in Chichewa, which is the local language. So a lot of children end up dropping out of school because they're lacking a lot interest due to the fact that the schools don't have the necessary supportive structures and mechanisms. The teaching and learning materials are insufficient. And in the health sector, the issue is the same. The number of health workers that are there is quite limited compared to the population that they have to serve. There are a lot of stockouts of medication. So despite the fact that the government says public health services are free, but when you go to the public health service and it takes you almost an entire day to be attended to, and then at the end of the day, you're told, oh, sorry, we don't have these particular medications, go and buy them at a pharmacy. And this is a private pharmacy. Communities, particularly people that are living in poverty, are then faced with a choice. And that choice is they have limited resources and they're not able to get the adequate health care that they need. So they end up not getting the medication, and we're seeing people that are dying from preventable deaths just because we don't have the necessary equipment in the hospitals or the medication that is needed, or we're expecting that people, especially those that are underprivileged, should buy or purchase these particular medications in private hospitals or private pharmacies, which is something that they cannot afford to do due to the limited financial capacity. And the cost of medication has continued to go up, and about 50% of the health workers that we had surveyed indicated the same. So inflation rates are already high, and that means that people continue to dig deeper in their pockets in relation to being able to get the support that they need. So I think by and large, all I can say is that the financial constraint in accessing full education services or public health services mean that government is not able to provide those core services as a human rights obligation. And that's because the government itself is also constrained, because they want to get access to finances from the IMF or the World Bank, and they're trying to meet those policy demands in terms of fiscal consolidation, in terms of managing the public sector wage bill, that then constrains the delivery and quality of service that is supposed to be provided to the citizenry. Additionally, we have seen, like for the Malawi government, that it's paying interest for the debt that it acquired at a rate of about 7% of its GDP, which is quite significant. And it's actually more compared to the resources that are allocated to the health and education services. So that is crowding out the available resources that the government is able to generate as domestic revenue in order to finance care services. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Yandura. And thank you for elucidating the fact that Global South, particularly African countries, are constrained by debt due to IFI pressure to impose austerity, and how this has affected social infrastructure, including education and healthcare. I will introduce our third panelist, Reshma Shakya, who is the Program Coordinator, LDC Watch and South Asia Alliance for Poverty Eradication, and a co-convener for the Tax and Gender Working Group, Tax and Fiscal Justice Asia. She's an experienced advocate on gender justice, economic justice, and tax fairness. She actively organizes and leads campaigns on women's rights, labor rights, food sovereignty, and economic justice, especially in South Asia and least developed countries. Reshma, My question to you is, why are issues such as fair allocation of taxing rights, taxation of high net worth individuals, tax transparency, and taxation of MNCs crucial for gender equality, and in this case, towards funding of care?
Thank you, Grace, for raising this important question. As we know that tax systems are not just technical tools, they are political and economic choices that influence who pays for public services and who benefits from them. This has a direct impact on gender equality because when tax systems underperform, women and girls who already shoulder the majority of the unpaid care work end up filling the gaps with little support. In most of the Asian and the Pacific, for example, women perform roughly 80% of unpaid care work hours, which is far more than men. Which limits their participation in paid work, education, and economic opportunities. While talking about the fair allocation of the taxing rights, current international tax rules often direct tax revenues to countries where multinational corporations are headquartered, usually wealthy economies, rather than to where people live, work, and where resources are extracted. This weakens the ability of many developing countries, especially in South Asia, to invest in public care systems and essential services. We can take some evidence from the South Asian countries like in India. It loses an estimated US dollar 10.32 billion annually to corporate tax abuse and profit shifting, which is the largest in South Asia. Similarly, in Pakistan, it loses around US dollar 2.53 billion each year due to similar abuses. In Bangladesh, multinationals shifted profit resulting in around US dollar 692 million in lost tax revenue between 2016 and 2021, which is equivalent to about a third of its health budget. In the case of Sri Lanka and also in the Nepal, they face significant losses from corporate tax avoidance and profit shifting that affecting their fiscal capacity. So these are the significant sums of money that could have been used to strengthen social services like healthcare, child care, social protections, education, all of which reduce women's unpaid caregiving burden. So when wealthy individuals are not effectively taxed, government often compensate by relying more on regressive taxes like VAT and other consumption taxes, which takes a larger share of income from poorer households. This is especially problematic for women who on average spend more of their income on essential and are less likely to be captured by the direct tax systems. So we can take an example of Bangladesh. The tax to GDP ratio is low, and indirect taxes make up a large share of revenue, and suggesting that wealthy individuals and corporations are not contributing their fair share through direct taxations. So less progressive taxation reduce the fiscal space available for public services that would lessen women's unpaid care work and forcing many women into precarious informal work and unpaid caregiving. Most of the multinational corporations often use profit shifting strategies. like moving income to low tax jurisdictions to reduce their tax liabilities. Globally, countries lose hundreds of billions of dollars each year because of the corporate tax abuse and wealthy individuals hiding assets offshore. We have a report from the Tax Justice Network. Also, it estimates that about USD 492 billions is lost annually due to the profit shifting and tax dodging by corporation and wealthy elites combinedly. So, without transparency measures such as public country by country reporting and beneficial ownership registries, government lack the information needed to ensure that profits are taxed where economic activity, including labor and care work, actually occurs. So, stronger transparency and cooperation would help ensure that tax is paid where it should be, generating revenues that can support public care services and strengthen social protection systems. So, while talking about why this matters for gender equality and care, that we know that lost tax revenues means less public funding for the essential services that especially benefit women and girls. At the same time, reliance on regressive taxation places a heavier burden on ordinary households, including women who spend a higher proportion of their income on basic goods, because women in most of the global south countries contribute a disproportionate share of unpaid care work. When public services are underfunded, they must fill this gap with the unpaid labor, further limiting their opportunities for paid work, education, and also the economic participation. So, strengthening fair allocation of taxing rights and implementing progressive taxation of wealthy individuals and corporations and enhancing tax transparency are therefore essential. This measure expands states' ability to fund public care infrastructures, redistribute resources more equitably, and reduce the burden of unpaid care, critical steps toward achieving the sustainable gender equality. So these are the some of the issues. Over to Grace. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Reshma, and thank you for shedding light on the nature of multinational corporations that continue to perpetuate gender inequality when they avoid, evade, and engage in other tax abuses, and for making this tangible by sharing your statistics in Asian countries. And indeed, I agree, transparency is crucial in ensuring tax revenue is redistributed to support care. I will move on back to Yandura. My question to you is, how do the unfair global tax rules limit countries' ability to fund care?
Okay, I think in relation to the unfair global tax rules, what we need to firstly interrogate is how the current international tax system was designed, who designed it, and whether it was designed in the best interest of the global south countries, which is not the case. The international tax system operates under the OECD-led tax norms or tax rules. And these are rich countries that had the prerogative to make a decision on behalf of the rest of the world in terms of how we are going to operate, how taxes are going to be taxed by different governments in relation to the operations of multinational corporations. So by that nature itself, in terms of how that process was done, it is quite regressive in nature and it is colonial, because these are decisions that were made years ago when most of the global South countries were not even free themselves. They were under the rules of the colonial governments. They had no say in relation to the decisions that were being made at that level. As such, the current tax rules favor source-based taxation, therefore limiting the ability of African governments or global South governments from collecting taxes from multinational corporations that are based in the global North but are operating in the different global South countries. And this also facilitates the creation of loopholes, facilitating tax dodging, facilitating illicit financial flows, whereby currently the statistics show that Africa is losing about $88 billion every year in illicit financial flows. And this is money that could also be used to invest in gender-responsive public services and public care infrastructure. So I think that is why the current discussion in relation to the UN Tax Convention is timely. That is why it is important to assert that the African countries or the global South governments also have a say in terms of how the global tax rules should operate, and that they should also operate to their advantage, to the advantage of their citizens and the government. And beyond the global tax rules, as looking at the operations of the multinational corporations, when they come to different countries, there are also a number of concessions that African governments have to make, or global South governments have to make. And these include the provision of tax incentives, some of which are quite exorbitant, leading to major tax losses, potential tax losses, money that could have supported public service provision. So I think by and large, what the key message in terms of how these unfair tax rules are limiting ability to fund care, it is that they are constraining the capacity of global South governments or African governments to be able to deduct taxes from multinational corporations, money that or revenue that can be generated to support the care infrastructure. And I think the activities that are taking place this week, including this webinar, should highlight those particular gaps and hold the global North governments or OECD countries to account to ensure that there is fair tax rules that will allow the fair allocation of taxing rights so that global South countries are also able to collect a fair share of taxes and invest those taxes in the care infrastructure and the provision of gender-responsive public services. And beyond that, I think the other aspect for me is that the UN Tax Convention should be able to structurally embed gender equality in the document, because we cannot talk about taxes without talking about what it means for the realization of the rights of women and for the human right to care. So there is need to push for stronger gender equality language within the document and not as an afterthought. Thank you. Over to you, Grace.
Thank you for that, Yandura. And this is something that we truly push for, the inculcation of gender within the UN Tax Convention. Moving on to Veronica. My question to you, Veronica, from your perspective, what are the risks when care systems are privatized, underfunded, or left to the market?
Thank you, Grace. I think that, first of all, we need a political approach that could really highlight the issue that profit must never undermine rights. And the approach as well that the dimension or the concept of the care economy has instrumentalized the issue that business and profit is inside the care dimensions. So I think that, first of all, what we are saying when we are raising the public nature of care and care as a public good and care as a human right is that we need rights and not profits, that we need public investment in that right, public investment in care, but this public investment could not be public investment in private businesses, because what the private sector is advocating to is that they are willing to have public funds in their businesses to provide care, that care that the state do not have the capacity to provide to citizens. So this public investment has to be invested in public capacity, not in private businesses. So this is the first thing that we need to highlight. And for sure, when the profit is the leitmotif of the investment in care systems, the access to care becomes dependent on the ability to pay. And this attacks universality. This has intersectional inequalities impacts. And for sure, families has the burden of that when they don't have the capacity to pay for care, and in families, women. So that is the dimension of unpaid care work. So woman is the one that absorbs the gaps through unpaid care labor. So I think that the profit extraction could not take over the well-being of communities, of societies, and that is the main approach. So that's why the fundamental role of the state is controlling, but providing also care. And we could say as well that when the public dimension of care is undermined, there's also a risk to undermine the public accountability and to undermine and to weaken the democratic way of providing and to performing care as the social well-being. So the main idea is that the state needs to have this fundamental role of providing and financing public systems, public services, and when it's possible as well, having the private sector in the care as a part of the actors of the social organization of care. So the role of the state is controlling, regulating all care providers and putting the public investment in public capacity. Thank you, Grace.
Thank you for that, Veronica. Indeed, I agree. Profit cannot overtake the well-being of societies. That's a very powerful statement. Moving on to Reshma. What would a truly feminist and care-centered global tax framework look like in practice?
Thank you, Grace. So, in my view, a truly feminist and care-centered global tax framework is one that prioritizes people's rights and well-being over narrow profit motives. And we can already see why this matters deeply from the live realities in the regions like South Asia. The tax system as they currently function not only shape how much revenue states can mobilize, but also who benefits from public services and who bears the cost of care and social reproduction. A feminist tax frame challenges the assumptions that tax is purely technical and instead recognize it as a tool for redistributing resources, reducing inequalities, and investing in care as a public good. So this transformation cannot happen without the engagement of the civil society, feminist movements, trade unions, grassroots organization, and also the community networks. CSOs plays a critical role in research, advocacy, awareness raising, and holding the government and international bodies accountable on taxation and gender justice. Through evidence based analysis, public education, and strategic campaigning, CSO help highlighting how existing tax rules disadvantage women and marginalized groups and advocate for progressive reforms that generate revenue for public care systems. Global campaigns such as the Global Days of Action on Tax Justice for Women Rights have brought thousands of activists, CSOs, and networks together to press for the gender transformative taxation on platforms like the UN Commission on States of Women and also in the UN Tax Convention process. So, a feminist tax framework starts with taxing right based on real economic activity rather than allowing profits to be recorded where companies choose favorable rules. Taxing rights should align with where value is created, including through labor, care work, and resource extractions. So this shift would help countries such as in Bangladesh, Pakistan, India, and also in Nepal retain more revenue rather than see it siphoned abroad through profit shifting, enabling them to invest in public care infrastructure that supports families and communities. So civil society analysis and mobilizations are critical in making these technical issues visible and also urgent. So alongside following or allocating taxing rights fairly, progressive and distributive taxation is essential. This means that ensuring that those with the greatest ability to pay, large corporation and high net worth individuals contribute proportionately more to public coffers. Progressive taxation expands fiscal space for care services and reduce dependence on regressive taxes like sales or consumption taxes, which fall disproportionately on low-income households and women, including those in informal and precarious work. So CSOs in many countries support public debates, policy briefs, and legislative engagement that push for these redistributive approaches, linking tax systems with social protection and gender equality objectives. So central to making these changes effective are strong transparency and accountability mechanism, such as public reporting, country by country reporting for multinational enterprises, and also I have already mentioned that public beneficial ownership registries equip governments, civil society, and communities with the information to counter profit shifting and tax avoidance. Without such transparency, it is difficult for countries to enforce fair tax outcome or ensure that economic activity, including care labor, is recognized and taxed where it actually occurs. So CSOs often highlight these gaps and press for concrete policy reforms that make tax system more visible and democratic. Another critical element is embedding gender impact assessment into tax policy making. Every tax policy, whether at a national or global level, should be evaluated not only for its revenue raising capacity, but also for how it affects unpaid care work, women's labor participation, and access to essential services. Such assessments help ensure that tax rules do not inadvertently reinforce
Sorry to
existing
cut you off,
disparities.
Reshma. Sorry to cut you off. Due to time, I'll give you one
Okay,
more minute
okay.
just to wrap up.
Okay. So, to
Apologies.
be truly transformative, a feminist tax framework must be anchored in binding global commitments rooted in human rights. So, the ongoing negotiations towards the UN Tax Convention represent a historical opportunity to embed enforceable, gender-responsive provisions from fair allocation of taxing rights to progressive corporate and wealth taxation within multilateral treaty. So civil society coalitions, including the feminist groups, trade unions, grassroots movements, have already submitted joint policy recommendation and mobilized global forums to ensure the convention prioritize gender equality and care financing. So this was from my side. Over to Grace.
Thank you for that, Reshma. I know we are short on time, but I'd like to kindly request an extra 15 minutes to allow us to go through the Q&As, the questions from the Q&A box, and then thereafter the panelists can give us their closing remarks. So with that said, I'll jump right into the questions. I have a question here for Veronica. Now that the Inter-American Court has recognized care as an autonomous human right, how do you think this can help advance the right to care in other parts of the world?
Yes, thank you. And this is a very important question that will allow me to invite our participants in this panel to another panel that we will be having in the context of the United Nations Commission of the Status of Women, Session 70, in which we are going to present a research study that Public Services International commissioned to the Global Labor Institute with this same question, saying, look, now the Inter-American Court has ruled care as a standalone human right. What is the current situation of this beyond Latin America and the Caribbean. So I will really like to invite you all to this panel. But specifically answering that, what I could say at the moment is that we need to fight for this right. And I am totally in agreement what Russia has said. This is an issue not only of governments, it's an issue of the social movement, of the feminist movement, of the human rights movement, of the trade union movement. We need to keep the fight. This is not only an economic issue. This is not only a legal issue, it's a political issue. And we need to push for that. Thank you.
Thank you, Veronica. So in the interest of time, I think I will ask all the questions, and then the panelists can give us their answers and share their final remarks. So my second question, what do you think our next steps should be in terms of the tax agenda to advance the provisions of quality public services? That one was addressed to Yandura. And I liked the relationship between the fair allocation of taxing rights and the injustice that means that the world's tax systems rely mainly on indirect taxes, such as VAT, to sustain the functioning of the state. How can this idea be advanced in the UN Tax Convention, which is working on this issue to develop concrete tools to reverse the situation? That was addressed to Reshma. And then how is the care situation for women in countries at war or under economic blockade assessed? That was addressed to all. So as you're giving your answers, I urge you to keep it short and give us your final remarks as well. Over to you,
All right.
Yandura.
Okay, great. In relation to the question on what should be or what could be our next steps to advance the tax agenda, I am looking at it from three angles. Number one, at the global level, I think the first thing is what is already being undertaken, which is the push for a fair global tax rules. So the current negotiations in terms of the drafting of the UN Tax Convention, that's a positive step forward. And I think that's where we also need to push in terms of much effort, view of the document to ensure that our key asks are part and parcel of what becomes the final convention. And I think the other thing in relation to what we can do as organizations, as a global network, is to advocate for increased corporate transparency in terms of tax transparency, and also push that governments should cooperate in order to curb illicit financial flows, because that would need a lot of international cooperation in relation to sharing data and information to curb illicit financial flows and also to tackle tax avoidance. And I think research also remains very key in terms of what we could do, because evidence generation is always key to any advocacy efforts. So we need to be able to produce evidence in terms of what is happening currently in the different countries and the different country experiences on provision of public services vis-a-vis revenue generation, and advocate also against harmful tax competition, because I think at the end of the day, what it then becomes is every global South government, particularly like here in Africa, everyone wants an investor, and they will look at what can I do in terms of incentivizing that an investor should choose Malawi and not Zambia, for example. And that then puts the Global South governments on a push for competition, and they race to the bottom because they would want to be the choice, the best choice that an investor may want, looking at the tax rebates or incentives that they may provide. So I think those are some of the things that we can look at in terms of at global level. At national level, we also need to be able to engage governments in relation to strengthening tax policies. And I think the research aspect that I talked about when I was focusing on global is also key. What are the weaknesses in terms of the taxation policies and the legal framework that may need tightening? And looking at how are the tax incentives provided? Who has the powers in providing that authority? Is there parliamentary scrutiny? Is there transparency and accountability in that process? So those are some of the things that we can also look at, and looking also at social accountability monitoring in relation to public finance management. So those are the aspects that I think we can also focus on in relation to how government is able to generate revenue and how that is also translated in terms of the service provision. And at community level, we need to continue raising awareness so that communities understand, people understand that the fact that citizens pay tax, there is a social contract between the government and the people. And that social contract entails that government should provide quality public services. And for governments that have stated that these particular services are free, they should indeed be free. So citizens have to know what type of taxes they pay. What is it that they can demand from government as a result of that social contract that is there between the people and the government? Thank you. Over to you, Grace.
Thank you, Yandura. Over to you, Reshma.
Thank you, Grace. So, about the questions, I think a fair allocation of taxing rights can help reduce the dependence on indirect taxes like VAT. In the UN Tax Convention, negotiators and advocates needs to push for the concrete rules in the convention text that strengthen countries' ability to tax profits where economic activity actually takes place, rather than letting profits be shifted away to low tax jurisdictions. This is already reflected in discussion around Article 4 of the draft convention, which proposed that every jurisdictions where economic activity occurs should have the right to tax income generated there, a shift away from old systems that favors residence countries and forces many developing countries to rely on regressive indirect taxes, means supporting drafting language that anchors taxing rights in real economic presence, including where business operate, sell, and generate value, and copying it with provisions that prevent profit shifting and tax abuse, so countries can retain more revenue. It also involves building safeguards, technical support, and capacity building measures within the convention to help countries strengthen direct taxation systems, reducing their reliance on consumption-based tax like VAT. So by embedding fair taxing rights linked to the real economic activity and strengthen tools to protect domestic revenue bases, the UN Tax Convention can help shift global tax system away from over-dependence on regressive indirect taxes and towards more equitable revenue mobilization that supports public services and care. I think I can clarify on these questions. Thank you. Over to Grace.
Thank you for that, Reshma. In the interest of time, I will give a brief remark and hand it over to Maureen to close the session for us. So as we bring this session to a close, let us carry forward the conviction that care is not charity nor a privilege, it is a human right. And today's discussions have been deep and elucidated the global care crisis and tied it to the unjust tax systems. The Global Days of Action remind us that change is possible when movements, advocates, and policymakers unite across regions and voices. I will hand it back to you, Maureen, to give your closing remarks.
All right. Thank you so much, Chris, and thank you so much to our panelists for the excellent remarks that they've shared, the excellent information that you've shared with us. So I will just quickly proceed to the very last session, which is in terms of closing and what next. How can you participate? How can you engage with us during this particular campaign? So on our GATJ website, under the tab Take Action, please click on the section indicated Tax Justice for the Human Right to Care, which is our campaign page. It has all the details regarding the campaign, including the detailed program, which is an array of activities planned by our Tax and Gender Working Group members. So we have several activities happening all the way from today until Friday, some spilling over to a bit of next week. So please engage in those activities. Note to also especially join the launch of the Framing the Feminist Taxation Guide, Volume 3, which is happening on the 4th of March. So it is this Wednesday at 2 to 3:30 p.m. CET time. So this will be the highlight of our campaign. This is a guide that is building onto Volume 1 and 2, and specifically focusing on the fiscal dimensions of care by providing case studies through an analysis of case studies from Argentina, Ecuador, Paraguay, Philippines, and Senegal. The campaign officially closes on the 6th of March, and we shall be having a closing webinar at the same time, 2 to 3 p.m. CET. So this closing webinar will be titled Towards a Feminist Fiscal System, the Negotiations for a UN Tax Convention. So this is really where we'll have a chance to delve deeper into the UNTC, what is at stake for feminist activists, how do the issues on fair allocation of taxing rights, high net worth individuals, tax transparency all come together towards our feminist cause. So it is very crucial for us all to really try and join that session so we can be able to see how do we amplify our voices, how do we take advantage of the UNTC. The campaign, of course, in total, as I mentioned earlier, has 6 demands, and we shall be amplifying a demand per day. Please check out our social media handles and engage. A detailed social media toolkit as well has been provided, and that shares all the key information, including the campaign infographics, the hashtag messages. And then on the 11th of March, we'll be having a parallel UNCSW event that shall be titled Recognizing Care as a Human Right. This will provide a chance to further amplify the campaign theme and, of course, tying it into the CSW and really unpacking what does it mean on care as a human right. So if you really want to continue this conversation, please also take notes to join that particular event. It will be taking place at 8:30 a.m. New York time. And with that, and I'm sorry, I have really tried to rush because of time. With that, we shall proceed to close the webinar. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us. And I will leave you with this famous saying, if you want to go quickly, go alone. If you want to go far, move together. Advocacy cannot be done alone. We need each other to maximize the impact. Have a wonderful day, evening, or night, depending on your time zone. Bye-bye, everyone.